When I first reviewed the Loud House movie released on Netflix back in 2021, I was excited to see what the show could do on a cinematic scale. At the time, I thought it was the best thing the series had ever done. Despite all the obvious shortcomings and flaws to some of the characters and story direction, not to mention some very contrived plot points, I was willing to look past a lot of them and still consider the movie an overall success. To a degree, it was successful because the series continued making more content following its release, so the movie didn't cause the series to get cancelled. That being said, however, a lot of time has passed since I last watched the movie. Looking back on it now and thinking about the review I made for it, I started to realize I may have oversold how good it was. I was really hyped about one of my favorite Nicktoons getting a feature-length film after 4 years of waiting, and I wanted to find as much good the movie had to offer, and to an extent, I did. But look, I'm just going to be completely honest with you all. In hindsight, the Loud House Netflix movie is not as good as I once thought. Now make no mistake, I'm not saying I absolutely hate this movie or think it's the worst thing the series has ever done. It does have a few things I really like, such as eye-catching visuals, musical numbers including the opening sequence for Life is Better Loud, and of course the celebrity voice talent. However, that's not enough for me to ignore the parts of the movie I was originally willing to look past. Now you're probably wondering, why do I not like the movie as much as I once did? Well, the reason is quite simple. Looking back on the movie now and rewatching the main series along with it, I reached a conclusion that I think some of us might agree with. It doesn't feel like a Loud House movie. What I mean by that is, whatever happens in the movie seems very much out of place compared to most other things in the Loud House universe. I know fantasy elements have been used in the series long before 2021, but the fantasy elements in this movie seem to go beyond what the series normally dabbles with. For example, when has the appearance and use of a dragon ever been a thing before and after the movie? What about Morag's dragon controlling witchcraft that never has an on-screen explanation of how it came to be? Yeah, I know the series is no stranger to crazy things happening that make little to no sense, like Lisa bringing dinosaurs to life from a book or Lucy talking to and summoning ghosts, but a dragon? That could probably work in other TV shows and movies, just not the Loud House. Not only that, but the rather contrived idea of the family's Scottish ancestors from hundreds of years ago bearing an exact resemblance to each of them felt like it was a thrown together idea without much thought going into it, among other things. Add all of that to a story about Lincoln feeling overshadowed by his sisters, a very common theme for a large number of writers in the fandom, the final product comes off as a big fanfiction inspired film, which is pretty much the same description I gave in my original review. I know a lot of what I just said may seem hypocritical to my stance on the series in general, and I still have more critiques about certain characters and story directions, but honestly, that's how I feel about the Netflix movie these days. I no longer see it as a 4-star film. As of late, I consider it a movie deserving of at least 2.5 stars, basically falling somewhere in the middle of being good and bad. So now you're probably asking, why am I bringing any of this up? What does this little rant of mine have to do with anything? Well, it all has to do with what I'm here to talk about today. No Time to Spy, a Loud House movie. This is the second animated film in the Loud House franchise. Technically, it could be considered the third if we included the Casa Grandes movie, because the spin-off takes place in the same universe as the Loud House. But anyway, No Time to Spy is going to be the subject of this video, and I'm just going to say this right now before I start my review. This movie is better than the first one. In fact, I would go so far as to say this is what the first Loud House movie should have been about. When looking at particular episodes in season 5, 6, and 7 of the TV series, and then looking at what happens in No Time to Spy, this actually feels like a Loud House movie. By that I mean whatever happens in this movie feels very much in place with the Loud House universe. It doesn't come off as a thrown together idea, and it looks like a lot of thought was put into it. I'll explain more as I go through this video, and I'll do my best to try and talk strictly about this particular movie and the TV series. Although I don't want to waste too much time talking about it more than I already have, I will occasionally bring up the Netflix movie for comparison purposes. Mostly it will be done as a way of emphasizing certain areas where the first movie fell short and where the second movie succeeded. Anyway, I think this introduction has dragged on long enough. So now, without much further ado, join me as I, SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, bring you my review of No Time to Spy, a Loud House movie. The first things I want to talk about are the story and the writing. The story is about the Loud family traveling to a tropical island for Albert and Myrtle's wedding, but things take a turn for the worse when some evildoers from Myrtle's past show up to cause trouble, not just for former Agent 28, but the rest of her family as well. Lincoln, being very passionate about being a spy, takes it upon himself to bring down the bad guys, but his actions cause his grand to get captured. With the help of his family, Lincoln embarks on the biggest spy mission of his life to save the day and the wedding before his grandmother's sworn enemy makes her pay the ultimate price. Sounds like a pretty interesting premise. On the surface, it does sound like another generic movie about spies taking down an evil villain, something we've all seen many times before. But it's how the movie runs with this premise and makes use of the spy elements is what counts, and the final product comes off as very impressive. Plus, a story about secret agents going after evil syndicates is way more realistic than a boy discovering he has royal lineage. Just saying. Anyway, to fully understand and appreciate the story of this spy movie, we have to first look at who wrote the script, who oversaw the entire production, and what led to the eventual creation of said movie. No Time to Spy was written by Whitney Weta and Jeff Sayers, two veteran writers from the TV series, and Michael Rubiner served as executive producer and Kyle Marshall as director. Right from the gate, and unlike the Netflix movie, No Time to Spy features several people who have both the experience of writing for the show and having an understanding of the characters. The biggest takeaway from these production credits would be how all four people I just mentioned are huge fans of the James Bond franchise, which was the inspiration for both the movie and the David Steele episodes of the TV series. According to a Comic Beats interview with Rubiner and Marshall, they explain how they, Whitney, and Jeff pooled their knowledge together to come up with ideas, and the movie greatly reflects their vision. From the iconic gun barrel sequence to references to classic film titles such as Thunderball and No Time to Die, and of course the intensity of the many fight scenes and chase sequences, it's clear these people knew exactly what was needed for what is basically an animated James Bond film with the Loud House characters as the main stars. A lot of this success can be attributed to how the TV series incorporated and made use of spy elements starting in season 5. David Steele was first introduced as Lincoln's newest passion back in the episode Family Bonding, and he and Clyde having adventures as spies became a recurring staple to their characters in quite a few episodes ever since. In terms of story ideas and later incorporating them into a feature film, No Time to Spy holds the edge over the Netflix movie in this regard. While the Scotland-based movie never had any pre-existing instances in the TV series with any of the characters interacting with dragons or having an actual deep dive into the family lineage, No Time to Spy has the advantage of having a story that made use of a recurring theme featured prominently over the course of 3 seasons. In other words, a movie about spies, evil villains, and freaking laser guns was not a random idea that came from out of nowhere. With the many David Steele style episodes, it seemed like the TV series had been setting up this movie for quite some time, and there's one episode in particular that greatly reinforces this. The episode I'm talking about is Pop Pop the Question from season 6. In that episode, it's revealed Myrtle used to work as a secret agent many years ago, and it was the same episode where she and Albert both proposed to each other. I mentioned in my review how there should be an episode where Albert and Myrtle are seen getting married, and this movie follows through on it. Once again, this is where No Time to Spy is better than the Netflix movie. No matter what director Dave Needham wants you to believe when it comes to a timeline of events, the Netflix movie was, and still is, non-canon to the TV show. Even after watching all of seasons 6 and 7, there has never been one direct reference or callback to the Loud family's adventure in Scotland. No Time to Spy, on the other hand, picks up where Pop Pop the Question left off. We even get a more thorough glimpse into Myrtle's past as a spy at the beginning, therefore making the movie canon to the TV show. That's one of my favorite things about the writing, setting something up early on in the story and then having it paid off later. Of course, seeing Albert and Myrtle getting engaged on TV and later tying the knot in the movie is not the only example of a storyline setup/payoff. The movie does this several times when something happens in either the first or second act, and then it becomes important during the second or final act. One example would be the scene where Mr. Grouse is told to look after Lisa's nuclear fusion laser while house-sitting for the family. Myrtle and Lisa are later seen using the computer console at the evil villain's lair to activate the same laser all the way from Royal Woods. They shoot an energy beam beam into the sky and it makes contact with a satellite, sending it crashing into the rocket Lincoln is trapped in and knocking the rocket off course. The impact causes the rocket to begin accelerating back towards Earth and crashing into the ocean. Another example would be the running gag with Lynn Jr. throwing things at Lori, but her sister can't catch anything that comes her way. This was in preparation for the wedding because Lori wanted to catch the bride's bouquet. She finally catches the flowers by the end, meaning she's next in line to get married. This makes sense because not only has it become very clear by this point in the franchise that Lori and Bobby are going to be together forever, but we also saw a glimpse of their wedding in the episode Driving Ambition. Now, this is the kind of long-term setup and future payoff we didn't think would ever happen, but there it is. So yeah, I have to give credit to the film's writing. Everything flows pretty smoothly, it knows when it's time to be serious, and it knows when it's time to inject a little comedy to lighten the mood. Sometimes you get a mix of both drama and humor in the same scene, and everything balances very nicely without anything feeling forced. Not only that, but the structure and pacing are also very good. It jumps right into the main story, and the plot never feels like it drags on. The total runtime is neither too short to feel like everything is being rushed, nor is it too long that it begins to lose the viewer's attention. Combine all of that with a story that has continuity with the TV series, and you get a strong, well-balanced movie. Of course, you can't have a good movie without a good cast, so now would be a good time to talk about the main characters. One of the best things about No Time to Spy is how the story makes use of the Loud family. Everyone has a chance to make an appearance and do something noteworthy, whether it's something minor, something silly, or something very significant to the overall story. Sometimes a combination of any two or all three. What's most eye-catching is that the Louds don't wear their usual clothes from the TV series. Because the story takes place on an island, they all wear something a little more tropical, and I'll admit, they look quite snazzy in these outfits. But anyway, this is the best use of the entire Loud family compared to the Netflix movie. Collectively, they have much more screen time and dialogue this time around, whereas they barely appear or even speak in the Netflix movie. They were reduced to mostly standing in the background while Lincoln took up the majority of the spotlight, and they only played a significant role during the final battle with Morag. While both movies have Lincoln's sisters and parents never going through any major character arcs, No Time to Spy makes the family more integral to the plot, and they help move the story forward, which includes partaking in the mission to rescue Myrtle by using Lisa's makeshift spy gadgets and helping to take down the henchmen. Even Lynn Sr. makes a contribution by disguising himself as one of the henchmen named Tony, who just so happens to have a birthday, and the other security guards try to celebrate their co-worker's special day. Two of the best characters of the entire film would be Lincoln and Myrtle, with the latter having a different actress. Due to scheduling conflicts, Jennifer Coolidge was unable to reprise her role, so longtime series regular Alex Kazari stepped in to voice Myrtle instead. To be perfectly honest, Alex does an incredible job as Myrtle. It doesn't sound like she's trying to imitate Jennifer's voice. She brings her own style to the character, and you can barely tell the difference. Anyway, I really liked the dynamic between Lincoln and Myrtle, it being the somewhat inexperienced and very eager rookie versus the experienced and level-headed master, and how the movie handles this dynamic is very well done. As expected for the main character of the TV series, Lincoln gets the most focus and undergoes a character arc on what it means to be a real hero. With Myrtle's many stories about her past life as a spy, Lincoln is overly excited about wanting to do spy stuff too, and thinks anything and everyone is suspicious when first traveling to the island. Essentially, he's depicted as a child with an overactive imagination who takes his spy persona with a level of seriousness, and yet part of him still thinks it's all fun and games. This is true in episodes like Present Danger, where the stakes were not that high when Rusty concocted a plan for Lincoln to get his hands on his own birthday present. However, him being a spy in episodes like Family Bonding, High Crimes, and Lights, Camera, Nuclear Reaction featured him taking his spy mission very seriously, with the stakes ranging anywhere from not so bad to pretty bad to straight up deadly and dangerous. Still, you could make an argument by saying Lincoln may not have fully understood the implications of what he was getting himself into at the time, and this could be justified by a few instances where it looked as though he was having more fun with what he was doing on the island instead of treating the situation with a great level of seriousness. Myrtle, on the other hand, tries to give Lincoln a reality check on the difference between just pretending to be or reading comic books about a fictional spy, and how the actions of being a real spy comes with actual life-threatening consequences. She tries to curb Lincoln's anxieties by saying he doesn't need to worry about any bad things happening to them while on their trip, although Lincoln isn't sure based on what he sees. For starters, he sees a shady guy with a mohawk and some guys handling some boxes on a nearby boat. These shady guys invade Albert's fishing boat and try to snatch Lincoln's camera after they see him taking pictures of them. After the fight, Myrtle realizes something is in fact very wrong, effectively validating all of Lincoln's supposed nonsensical paranoia from earlier. However, that doesn't necessarily mean Lincoln was acting more responsible than Myrtle, because the latter has enough years of experience to recognize what the current situation called for. Myrtle contacts her old spy boss and tells her to send an agent to the island to deal with the people they had just seen. Even though she's already there, Myrtle declines to take the mission herself because she's retired and has a family now, and she wants to get them away from the danger. Lincoln, however, accepts the mission without Myrtle's knowledge. Once again, their dynamic is on full display because Myrtle was smart enough to realize coming out of retirement was going to endanger the lives of her new family. On the flip side, Lincoln was too excited to turn down a great opportunity to have a David Steele-style adventure with someone who knows the ropes, and it was to prove he wasn't just some little kid who didn't understand the way one plays the spy game. Unfortunately, accepting the mission turns out to be part of Lincoln's ultimate downfall. He ends up proving Myrtle and the main antagonist correct about the kind of character he is by how he conducts himself at certain points in the story. Although he does his best and has several moments where he very clearly knows what he has to do, he has quite a few missteps in how he goes about being a spy. He appears uncoordinated and unprepared in the fight at the restaurant and when he's running away from the bad guys after Myrtle gets captured. He also accidentally set off a booby trap, separating half of the family while infiltrating the evil lair where Myrtle was being held captive. In fairness, Lincoln's miscalculations in this movie would seem contradictory to his spy performances in the TV series, where he was a lot more focused and organized on what he was doing or what he was planning to do. Still, this movie does a good job at demonstrating how, despite having some prior experience and knowledge, Lincoln still has a lot to learn about being a professional spy. Again, this is a clear contrast to Myrtle, an actual professional spy. Even after 37 years since she stopped working, she can still hold her own in a fight and knows how to deal with the bad guys effectively and efficiently, which includes innovative ways of breaking out of her holding cell in the evil villain's lair, both in the present and in the past. If anything, she may not have gotten captured at all had it not been for Lincoln. Like I said, their relationship in this movie is handled very well, and it really comes to its high point when they're faced with the possibility of dying. Myrtle has a plan to escape the rocket their family is trapped on by escaping through the toilet and using the septic system as an escape pod. Unfortunately, someone would have to close the tank from the outside in order to successfully detach their pod from the rocket, meaning one of them was not going to be coming back with the others. Lincoln was ready to make the sacrifice to save his family because he was the one who got everyone into this mess. Myrtle insists that she'll be the one to stay behind because the spy life has consequences and she thought she could escape her past, but it will always be there. Plus, having a family would make things even more difficult, hence why she almost considered abandoning her plan to marry her fiancé if it meant keeping him and his family safe. Even Albert was prepared to die with his fiancée if it meant saving his family. In a last-ditch move, Lincoln decided to make the sacrifice to save everyone else's lives. With the grappling hook Lisa made for Lori and the artificially enhanced watch she made for her brother, Lincoln activates the built-in magnetic feature and gets his grandparents off the rocket. On a side note, this whole scene with the spy gadgets was another example of setting up something earlier in the story and then having it paid off later. Lisa told Lincoln the special magnetic feature on his watch could only be used once and he had to use it wisely. That's exactly what Lincoln did, and I have to say, the entire scene with him on the rocket was one of his best performances in the franchise. You feel so bad for Lincoln when he admits to being a dumb kid whose reckless actions put his family on the fast track to being killed. He thought he was doing the right thing by wanting to stop the bad guys, but his inexperience and eagerness to prove he was a hero led to, at the current moment, the demise of his loved ones. Lincoln felt he messed up so badly that he was willing to throw away all his David Steele stuff right then and there as tears ran down his face while his family looked on feeling the same pain he felt. Lincoln making the tough choice to stay behind while his family escaped from the rocket ties into what Myrtle told him earlier in the movie. She said being a spy is not just about flashy gadgets. It's about making tough choices even if you don't like it. Additionally, it's also about getting your family to safety, and that's precisely what Lincoln learned and subsequently put into practice. When the rest of the family escapes the rocket and think Lincoln is a goner, Myrtle stumbles upon one of her grandson's discarded comic books and has an idea on how to bring him back. Thanks to Lisa's laser from back home, the rocket hurtles its way back to Earth, and Lincoln is eventually saved. In a way, Myrtle also goes through a character arc by recognizing how Lincoln's passion about being a spy had its benefits in the long run. Had it not been for his David Steele comic book, her grandson may not have ever been seen again. Even the most experienced professionals can still learn a thing or two about their job, even if they have to learn from a fictional comic book character. There's a bit more I want to discuss about Lincoln and Myrtle's characters and how they're presented throughout the film, but I can't do that without talking about the main villains they encounter along the way. The first baddie I want to talk about is quite honestly a personal favorite of mine, and it's not because he was inspired by Jaws from the James Bond films. I'm talking about Ham Hand, short for Hammer Hand, because he has a large hammerhead attachment for a hand after his original hand got crushed in a wrestling match. He's one of my favorite characters for two reasons. One, he's a professional wrestler, and two, he's voiced by Paul White, aka The Big Show from WWE. I'm really surprised the series never had this guy play a role in the episode Can't Lend Them All, where the entire episode was about professional wrestling. I mean, Paul White's character wears a wrestling singlet during his fight with Myrtle. It does seem like a missed opportunity in hindsight, but hey, better late than never. Ham Hand also has this little recurring gag about taking great pride in his long hair, which he surprisingly still has after 37 years, minus a bald spot, of course. In fact, it looks as though he barely aged at all, but that's beside the point. The most I can say about his character is that he has his typical tough guy moments mixed in with a few funny bits here and there, and his interactions with Myrtle were some of my favorite highlights. There's also the guy with the mohawk who appears during the first half of the movie, the same guy Lincoln initially suspects and determines to be up to no good when he sees him and his cronies handling some very suspicious looking boxes. But after the chase sequence with Lincoln and Myrtle, he's never seen or heard from again, leaving his fate unknown. Sequel bait, perhaps? Anyway, on the surface, these two appeared to be the main bad guys working for Myrtle's old enemy from the past, Rufus Dufu. The last name is obviously spelled to look like the word doofus, but it's supposed to be a French surname pronounced as Dufu. I don't know, Rufus Doofus just sounds funnier to me. But yeah, Rufus is the one you think is going to be revealed as the main villain, but at the same time you're also wondering how that's even possible. In a flashback during the cold opening, Rufus had a plan to rule the world, which involved sending a rocket equipped with lasers into space that would take out all of Earth's communication satellites. That way, he and his wife could own and control all forms of TV and phone communication. Yeah, that sounds like a really generic plan coming from a very generic and eccentric looking evil villain, but I'll give him a point for this creative, yet bizarre scheme of his. He meets his demise when he slips on some spilled coffee and falls into his own rocket, trapping himself inside. Myrtle successfully disarms the lasers, but she can't stop the rocket from taking off before the countdown expires. When the timer reaches 0, the rocket gets launched into space with Rufus still trapped inside. It's heavily implied he died sometime afterwards because there was no way the rocket could ever return to Earth, according to Myrtle's old spy boss. So how could anyone be working for a guy who was launched into space and had no logical way of coming back? Well, it turns out these bad guys actually were working for Dufu, just not the one the audience or the characters were expecting. This is where we come to Fifi. More specifically, Fifi Dufu, Rufus's wife and the film's main antagonist. Fifi is voiced by actress Amy Sedaris, and for the character she was asked to portray, her performance was top-notch. Fifi is introduced in the first act as a tourist staying at the same island resort as the Louds. She later finds Lincoln's camera after it fell into the water during the boat fight, and she interacts with Lincoln and his family in a few scenes. Right away, you can tell she's going to play a pivotal role based on the number of times she appears on screen. But given her spontaneous and overly joyful personality, it's a little unclear if she's really playing for the good guys or bad guys. As I said, part of you thinks the Mohawk guy and Ham Hand are working on behalf of their old boss Rufus. You're led to believe Rufus somehow managed to find his way back to Earth, even though his rocket was sent into orbit with no possibility of ever coming back. Either way, you might think Fifi would be an ally to the Louds in some way, like how she pulls up with a dune buggy and doesn't realize she's actually helping them. However, she's revealed as the movie's main villain as well as the wife of Rufus Dufu. She recalls the day she witnessed Myrtle sending Rufus into space. Fifi assumed it was deliberate, even though it was really an accident and Myrtle was actually trying to stop the rocket from taking off. Either way, that's when Fifi started plotting her revenge on Agent 28. Her plan was to never take over the world like her husband wanted to do. Instead, she made it personal with Myrtle by devising a plan to lure both her and the Louds into her secret mountain lair and take away Myrtle's family the same way Agent 28 took away Fifi's husband, by trapping them in a giant rocket and launching everyone into space. Arguably, this plan of hers may not have even happened had Myrtle never started dating Albert. Since Myrtle had no family of her own, Mrs. Dufu very well could have been waiting to exact this specific type of revenge and may never have had the opportunity to do so. But after years of waiting, she finally got her chance when she saw Myrtle's wedding announcement in the Royal Woods Gazette. She had been studying the Loud family for months and learned pretty much everything about their individual personalities, especially Lincoln's. How she was able to gather that much intel is never outright explained or even shown in a flashback, but regardless, she knew exactly what to do and when it would be the right time to strike. Hell, she even found out the time and date of the flight and destination the family booked for the wedding. That's a good example of being a smart and calculating villain playing the long game. She only pretended to be cheerful and quirky as a way of cozying up to the family to lull them into a false sense of security and eventually into her trap. That way, no one would ever think someone as overly upbeat like her could have some dark and sinister motives. From a secret agent perspective, trusting this woman ended up being one of the biggest mistakes Lincoln could have made. Fifi needed to get close to the family, and she saw Lincoln as the perfect candidate to accomplish her goal. Being a little boy playing spy, and knowing Myrtle would still have connections to her old work colleagues, Fifi knew Lincoln wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of going on an epic adventure, and that's why he easily fell into her carefully constructed trap. The boat, the boxes filled with parts to construct the rocket, everything that happened at the restaurant, the dune buggy, it was all a setup from the start, and Lincoln never suspected a thing. The biggest problem Lincoln endured was that he was never fully consistent with how he went about carrying out his mission. Normally, a professional spy uses good judgment and tends to approach everything and everyone with a hint of skepticism. While Lincoln was skeptical about what the henchmen were doing out on the boat, and smart enough to try navigating the secret lair as discreetly as possible without being spotted, Lincoln never once thought Fifi could be behind some master plan to lure him and his family into the same secret lair. He didn't think someone like her could be an evil villain, but that's one of the most important things to remember about being a spy. You can't trust everyone, not even if the person appears to be good-natured and innocent. Lincoln's complete lapse in judgment adds some weight to what Fifi said about him being an irresponsible little kid. If he was that good of a spy, he wouldn't have been so quick to allow his family to hop into Fifi's dune buggy. He would have been asking questions about the driver who just randomly showed up to his location with something he just so happened to need. He also wasn't the least bit skeptical about this woman quickly and very conveniently finding his camera not long after it fell into the water. Fifi only further emphasizes Lincoln's recklessness by saying he wasn't even responsible enough to keep track of his grandparents' wedding rings, a task Myrtle trusted him to do at the beginning of the movie. They fell out of his possession after Hamhand sent him and Myrtle flying into a ditch, and he never once checked to make sure he still had them. To make things even more painful and heartbreaking, Fifi tosses the rings into the water during her fight with Myrtle. During the same fight, she fumbles her phone, which has the capability of deactivating the rocket from launching into space, and she falls over the edge of the helicopter pad outside her lair while trying to retrieve it. Myrtle grabs her arm, but rather than allowing her sworn enemy to pull her to safety, Fifi lets go and laughs maniacally as she falls into the water. Her phone finishes the countdown just before making contact with the water, allowing the launch to go ahead as planned. Just think about that for a second. Fifi would rather risk dying knowing her plan to destroy Myrtle and her family was going to be a success than allowing her sworn enemy to save her life. I mean, she already lost her husband and her chances of having a family with him, so she didn't really have anything left to lose. You see, this is why Fifi is a great evil villain. She has a good backstory, she's manipulative, she has a clear motivation for going after someone who wronged her, she has a carefully crafted plan in order to achieve her goal, and she has no second thoughts about killing innocent victims, let alone risking harm to herself. Oh yeah, and she's downright crazy and psychotic. Morag and her motivation for destroying the Louds, all for the sake of peace and tranquility, on the other hand, could never hold a candle to Fifi. Both villains may have a devilish way of permanently taking out the Louds, but in a one-on-one matchup, how Fifi is handled as a main villain is better than how Morag is handled as a main villain. On the flip side, one aspect to Myrtle's spy character I think is worth mentioning is that, unlike the villains, she never goes to the extremes of stopping her enemies by killing them. She shows concern for their well-being, hence why she wanted to stop Rufus's rocket from blasting off all those years ago and wondered if there was a way to bring him back. She retains the same attitude 37 years later when she genuinely wanted to pull Fifi to safety when she was dangling above the water. Myrtle is all about just stopping evildoers from destroying the world, not ending their lives, and I greatly respect that. But do you know the one character I really respect the most out of everyone in the movie? It would be Albert. As small as it might seem, he goes through a little character arc of his own. Because Lincoln appears to be paying more attention to Myrtle than to him, Albert worries he's small potatoes compared to his fiancée because of her exciting past. He has several moments where he thinks he's not good enough for both his grandson and his soon-to-be wife. He even blamed himself for being a bad fiancé for allowing his soon-to-be wife to get captured, even if there was realistically nothing he could have done to stop it. That's some pretty powerful stuff right there. However, his biggest and most powerful scene was after Lincoln's rocket came crashing back to Earth. Thanks in part to the hydraulic brass knuckles Lisa made for him, Albert proves he's not insignificant when he saves his grandson from almost drowning when the rocket begins filling up with water. Albert may not be my favorite character of the movie, but coming through for his grandson who risked his life to save his family from a problem he roped them all into was very heroic. In the end, Lincoln sells his collectible and artificially enhanced David Steele watch in order to buy his grandparents some makeshift wedding rings, a big sign of growth and maturity on his part, and Albert and Myrtle are officially married, although Albert's last name is never revealed during the ceremony. Another wasted opportunity to find out Rita's last name before she got married. And finally, we see Fifi and Ham Hand were captured and subsequently arrested, ending the movie on a satisfying note. But wait! I'm not done yet. This last section of the video is going to cover the visuals, music, and a few other miscellaneous things. In terms of visuals, this movie has it all when it comes to animation. At the risk of sounding like a broken record by this point, the presentation of this movie is a vast improvement from the Netflix movie. The animation in the Netflix movie had a more cinematic look, as if it was made to be shown in theaters. The animation for that movie was done by Top Draw Animation. The animation in No Time to Spy was done by Jam Filled Entertainment, the same company that works on both The Loud House and The Casa Grandes. Because the animation in this movie looks similar to that of the original TV series, No Time to Spy gives the impression that it was meant to be more of a special extended episode than an actual movie. Interestingly, according to the film's Wikia page, it says, quote, "The film occupies 6 of the 7th season production slots, which explains why season 7 only consists of 20 episodes instead of the standard 26, end quote. Technically, this is incorrect if we were to look at the total runtime for 6 standard half-hour-long episodes of the TV series and the total runtime for this movie, roughly 81 minutes when factoring in the opening and end credits. Regardless, I have nothing to complain about when it comes to the visuals. The fights, the chases, the way Myrtle quickly moves as the rocket begins to take off, all the action sequences look amazing. Even the part where Myrtle flies past the iconic mountain from the Paramount Pictures logo was awesome. If only they could have animated the real logo to slowly transition into the animated one. Now that would have been plain epic. All of these visuals are nicely complemented by the film's soundtrack. Whether it's an intense action scene or a moment of great sadness or happiness, the music adds an extra layer of emotion. Unlike the Netflix movie where it had its own original score composed by Philip White, the music and song numbers in this movie were composed by Jonathan Highlander, who also composes the music for the TV series. With the amount of TV series music cues playing in the background at certain points, this lends more credibility to the idea that No Time to Spy was meant to be more of an extended episode than a feature-length movie. But yeah, the songs and music in this film are very good, especially the song Luna plays during the wedding reception. A few miscellaneous things worth noting would be how Flip has an identical twin cousin named Flop who runs the resort the Louds are staying at. Just like Flip, Flop is a dirty cheapskate who specializes in his own version of Flippies called Floppies, and he also has multiple jobs/identities such as being a limo driver, a police chief, and a wedding officiant. Then there's a sequence where Myrtle switches places with a hotel employee so she can follow Lincoln Lincoln, and all the Lau girls and Todd assume they're taking the real Myrtle to her bachelorette party. Even though this kid has this running gag of nervously saying, "I'm Myrtle," which gets old really fast, and his disguise is kinda cringy, this little switcheroo was still kinda funny for the most part, and at least he and the Lau girls are seen having a good time together. It all comes to an end when Lincoln exposes his identity, although you have to wonder how this charade wasn't exposed sooner given the obvious mop handle on this guy's head. Anyway, he's immediately kicked out of the limo, but surprisingly he shows up at the wedding still dressed as Myrtle and can be seen dancing with Albert during the end credits. Yeah, that's a thing that happened. And speaking of the wedding itself, you'll notice how there's practically no one from either side of the Loud family at the ceremony. Not even Leonard and Lance's family appear as guests. It's just the immediate Loud family, a few nameless randos, and Myrtle's longtime friend and old spy boss named X. Oh yeah, I completely forgot to talk about X. Call me totally crazy, but was her character inspired by Mr. X from Amphibia? I can't be the only one who noticed the similarity between these two. And finally, I want to quickly acknowledge the part where Rita refers to Myrtle as Mom, even though at that moment she wasn't talking to the actual Myrtle. It may have been a quick moment, but it was also a very sentimental and touching moment too. Just like her kids accepting Myrtle into the family back in Season 3 by calling her Gran instead of her regular name, Rita recognizing Myrtle as her new mom instead of just viewing her as her father's new wife was just, I don't know, just very wholesome. Perhaps it's the best way of demonstrating how just because you're not blood related, it doesn't mean you can't be family. With all the crazy things these characters went through in this movie, Myrtle truly is one of the Loud family. So that was No Time to Spy, and now for the big questions. Was this movie worth the hype? Did it deliver on everything it was supposed to? Is it everything you could ever expect from the Loud House? The answer to all three questions, at least for me, is a resounding yes. I may have had some doubts going into this film when I first heard about it and thought it would be on the same level as the Netflix movie, maybe even turning out worse than the original. However, this movie met and exceeded my expectations far better than I anticipated. No Time to Spy has both the look and feel of a Loud House production. The story, the characters, the writing, the pacing, the action, the music, the setups and payoffs, the climax, the humor, the drama, the ending, everything about this movie practically screams Loud House. Whether or not you're a James Bond fan or a fan of spy movies in general, there's still plenty to appreciate here. From Lisa creating impressive and highly functional spy gadgets for her family, except her dad out of fear for his own safety, to Myrtle having an old person moment with an e-scooter in what is supposed to be a dire situation, I don't think you could ask for a better Loud House movie than this. Be that as it may, it does have a few head scratchers, like never getting a clear understanding of how Fifi was able to gather all that information about the Loud family in order to kickstart her evil plan against Myrtle. There's also a scene where Clyde helps Lincoln decipher a picture he took while spying on the bad guys, and then Clyde is never relevant to the story after that. Still, if I had to choose between this movie and the Netflix movie, it's not even a contest. No Time to Spy succeeds where the Netflix movie fell short. So if you're a fan of the Loud House, you'll definitely enjoy this movie. I know I sure did. But even if you're just a casual fan or someone who may have fallen off the wagon and stopped watching, I would still recommend giving this movie a chance. Compared to a contrived film about royalty and dragons, a spy movie with actual continuity to the TV series makes for a better story. But, as always, that's just my opinion. With that said, I give No Time to Spy, a Loud House movie, 4.5 stars out of 5. Well folks, that concludes my review of No Time to Spy, a Loud House movie. Now that you know what I thought of it, I just have to ask, what did you guys think of the movie? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video. But until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.